It's July 22, 2026. I'm Quito Espiritu, welcoming you to the pilot episode of CrossViews, important weekly news analyzed from a Christian worldview. In this episode, we're analyzing the 85 peso wage hike's impact on workers and small businesses alongside the BSP's removal of small digital transfer fees to promote economic fairness. We're exploring how soaring living costs force many young adults to delay traditional family plans despite desiring marriage and parenthood. We're considering the moral and spiritual limits of technology, from agentic AI and biological risks to biohacking and AI companionship. We're also looking at ongoing legal and institutional battles abroad, which affirm the primary authority of parents over their children's moral instruction. We're defining the biblical limits of state authority by examining local corruption, street protests, as well as oppression abroad in Cuba, Mozambique, and China. Finally, we're spotlighting empirical evidence from ancient Canaanite DNA and preserved dinosaur soft tissue that supports biblical history and human unity. Now, before we jump in, since this is the very first episode, I just want to clarify the heart behind this podcast. For a long time, I've wanted to have a reliable news source that focused on things that were directly relevant to me as a Christian, called to be rooted in a local church, and a witness to my neighbors. In fact, more than 10 years ago, I started a blog that took this direction. It was called CrossViews. But it was just too time-consuming to be a side project, and eventually I had to pull the plug to stop it from interfering with more important responsibilities. But since then, I've been struggling to keep up with the news, especially local news, because the low-hanging fruit, the news that is the easiest to find, is usually political, superficial, or so fragmentary that most of the time it feels like a waste of time to me. But now, with AI tools like Gemini and Gemini Notebook, I can make a podcast like this with curated news articles that can actually help me understand important events and trends in the Philippines and beyond from a solidly biblical perspective. And since it doesn't take much extra effort to share this podcast with others, I've decided to try doing just that. This production process is still a work in progress, so if you have any constructive criticism, leave a comment below. I hope you find this content informative and insightful. If you do, then like and subscribe, and it will let me know to keep posting more episodes like this. So, without further ado, here's the AI-assisted pilot episode of CrossViews.
Usually when you look at a compass, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
You're right. It just points north.
Exactly. You're lost in the woods, the sky's getting dark, you pull out this little metal disc, and the needle swings. It gives you an objective reality when, everything around you is just totally disorienting.
And it's comforting because it's fixed. Like, the environment around you might be chaotic, the terrain might be completely unfamiliar, but true north doesn't care about your feelings.
Yeah, it doesn't care about the weather either.
No, it just is. It's an anchor.
But then, you step into the world of modern news, you look at the daily headlines, the intense cultural shifts, the political battles happening locally and globally.
And it's exhausting.
It really is. Suddenly, it feels like everyone is holding a compass where the needle is just spinning wildly. We're looking at an informational landscape that is intentionally murky.
Murky is a good word for it.
Yeah, because every pundit, every algorithm, every social media feed is trying to redefine true north based on, what's popular or what's utilitarian or what's just profitable for that specific day.
And that leaves the average person feeling completely unmoored. I mean, if truth is just whatever works in the moment, if it's just secular relativism, then you literally have no anchor when a real storm hits.
Which is exactly why we're doing this. Today, we are taking a massive stack of news and running it through a single, unchanging filter to find that true north.
I love that.
We have a mountain of material to process today. I mean, we are looking at everything from artificial intelligence systems designing bioweapons to massive political clashes over parental rights in the classroom.
All the way to ancient Canaanite DNA and dinosaur tissue, it is a staggering variety of information.
It really is.
But, that is the beauty of having an objective anchor. Whether you are looking at the microeconomics of a neighborhood market or the grand timeline of human history, the standard doesn't change.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're taking all this information, which comes from the recent July edition of the CrossViews Digest, by the way.
Which is a great source.
It is. It pairs on-the-ground factual reporting with a very distinct biblical editorial analysis. And we are going to look at the mechanisms behind these events. Our mission for this deep dive is to understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening, and how it intersects with a God-centered worldview.
Because we aren't meant to look at these events with passive detachment. We want to extract the facts and evaluate them against God's unchanging standards of goodness, justice, truth, and mercy.
Right, so that we can actually navigate our daily lives with wisdom. And let's start right where everyday life happens, our wallets, our daily labor, and our homes.
Most practical stuff.
Exactly. Because before we talk about global tech or ancient history, we have to talk about how economic policy is actively impacting human flourishing right now. Here in Metro Manila, the financial realities on the ground are incredibly tense.
Oh, they are.
The Department of Labor and Employment, DOLE, just confirmed that a historic 85 peso daily minimum wage hike for workers in the National Capital Region is pushing through.
No delays on that, right?
No delays at all.
And we really need to look at the mechanics of how this rolls out, because for a daily wage earner, the timing is everything. The first adjustment actually takes effect immediately on July 25, 2026.
Okay, so that's right around the corner.
Yeah, and that provides an initial 60 peso increase. So for your non-agricultural workers in the metro area, their daily minimum goes from $695 up to $755.
And then there's a second tranche, right?
Right. The remaining 25 pesos kicks in later in January 2027.
So if you are a typical minimum wage worker in Pasay or Quezon City, that initial 60 peso bump means an extra 1,320 pesos a month for 22 working days.
Which is significant.
When you're staring down high food prices and skyrocketing rent, that is incredibly tangible relief. You have, 1.1 million wage earners who desperately need that money just to buy rice and pay for basic utilities?
The human need there is undeniable. And Scripture is very clear on the dignity of labor. A worker is worthy of his wages. Employers have a moral obligation to treat laborers with fairness and mercy.
Right. The laborers need their daily bread.
But when you mandate a sudden economic shift like this from the top down, you have to look at the entire ecosystem. And the private sector is sounding a massive alarm right now.
Yeah, the Foundation for Economic Freedom actually petitioned to pause this whole thing. They pointed out that this is an abrupt 12% wage adjustment.
Which is huge.
It completely outpaces actual labor productivity growth. They're looking at the micro, small, and medium enterprises, the MSMEs, and these aren't massive multinational corporations,
No, these are the small neighborhood shops, the local carinderias, the independent mechanics.
Exactly. They make up over 90% of local businesses.
And they're already operating on razor-thin margins. They're drowning in high electric bills, expensive fuel, and rent. Even the Bangko Sentral and Pilipinas, the BSP, admitted they were completely caught off guard by this.
Wait, really? The central bank didn't see this coming?
No, they expected a 6% hike. They got double that. Analysts are estimating this could add almost 0.2 percentage points to overall inflation across the metropolis.
So you have labor groups on one side saying, we actually need a family living wage of over 1,300 pesos a day just to survive, so this 85 pesos is barely scratching the surface.
And you can understand their perspective.
Of course. But on the other side, small business owners are saying, if you force this 12% increase on us overnight, we don't just lose profit, we go bankrupt.
Right. It's often described as a wage price seesaw.
But, a seesaw implies balance. This is more like a treadmill. The government turns up the speed by mandating higher wages, so businesses have to turn up the incline by raising their prices just to survive.
And eventually the small, sorry store owner just gets thrown off the back of the machine completely.
That treadmill analogy captures the exact danger, doesn't it?
It does. And this is where a biblical lens brings real clarity to the concept of economic justice. We often think of justice merely as wealth redistribution.
Like Robin Hood.
Yeah, but we have to look at the incentives. If a local shop owner is overwhelmed by sudden state-mandated labor costs, they don't have a magical reserve of cash to pull from. They have two choices.
They cut working hours or they close their doors.
Precisely. which means the worker gets zero wages. It actively destroys jobs, preventing the poorest among us from earning a living through honest work.
Wow, so trying to force fairness actually hurts the people it's supposed to help.
The biblical goal of economic justice isn't about penalizing enterprise or forcing artificial equality. It's about fostering an environment where productive labor can flourish. It's about ensuring the marketplace is fair so that honest work yields a genuine reward.
That concept of a fair marketplace connects directly to another major move by the BSP regarding digital transfer fees. And this might seem like a small administrative detail to some, but the impact is massive.
It really is.
The central bank recently issued Circular 1238, pushing banks to eliminate digital payment fees for small transactions.
And to understand why this matters, you have to look at it from the perspective of the working poor.
Right.
For a corporate executive, paying a 15 or 25 peso online transfer fee to send money to someone is a rounding error. They don't even look at it.
But for a market vendor selling vegetables, or a daily wage earner remitting money to their family in the province.
Exactly. A 15 peso fee on a small transaction is a heavy punitive tax.
It actively keeps them out of the formal banking system. It forces cash to remain the default because they simply cannot afford the friction of those digital fees.
And the BSP wants digital payments to hit 60 to 70% of all retail transactions by 2028. They realize that keeping these high fees in place is essentially redlining the poor out of the digital economy.
They actually compared it to building the plumbing of the financial system.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, the banks are highly profitable right now. Their non-interest income is rising. They can afford to restructure this.
They definitely can. And if we evaluate this through a moral lens, removing these financial hurdles for everyday workers is actually a profound mandate.
How so?
Well, Proverbs chapter 14, verse 31 teaches that economic structures must never oppress the working poor. Leviticus chapter 19, verses 35 through 36 demands just weights and measures, meaning a fair, honest marketplace.
So when a bank charges an exorbitant fee for a simple digital ledger update, it's the modern equivalent of an unjust weight.
Exactly. Restructuring these fees so they don't disproportionately burden micro merchants reflects the character of righteousness and mercy. It promotes equal access to resources.
But the economic pressures we are talking about don't just affect business operations. They are fundamentally altering the most intimate aspects of human life.
This is where it gets really personal.
The CrossViews Digest highlights a staggering global economic survey about family formation. This is where the macroeconomics actually hit the human heart.
Dr. Elizabeth Vance led this demographic survey across 10 major industrialized nations, looking at 25,000 adults aged 20 to 35.
So we're talking about millennials and older Gen Z.
Yes, and the data completely shatters the popular narrative. We are constantly told that younger generations just don't value traditional marriage anymore, that they prefer independence and career over family.
But the survey found the exact opposite, didn't it?
It did. 78% of these young adults strongly desire traditional lifelong marriage and children. The desire for the family unit is deeply embedded in them.
But there's a catch.
A big one. 65% of them say they are actively delaying marriage and parenthood. Why? Because they feel it is financially unattainable.
90% said their primary life goal right now is achieving long-term financial security. I mean, in major cities, whether you're looking at London, Tokyo, Sydney, or right here in Metro Manila, residential property prices have surged over 35% in just the last 3 years.
And real wages haven't come close to keeping up.
Not at all. So you have young adults pushing their wedding plans deep into their 30s, taking on multiple side hustles, just trying to afford a shared rental apartment.
It creates a culture of deep anxiety. The secular worldview tells these young people that they must achieve complete material security. They need the house, the career stability, the robust savings account before they even think about forming a family.
It's like the culture has turned marriage and children into luxury items reserved for the financially elite.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So put yourself in the shoes of a young Christian couple. They want to honor God's design for marriage. They want to start a family. But they're staring down terrifying condo prices in Quezon City, or they're looking at grocery bills that eat up their entire paycheck.
It feels utterly impossible.
What does this mean for them practically?
It means they are facing a profound test of faith, and it requires a fundamental shift in how they view security. The biblical worldview directly confronts this secular anxiety. Scripture teaches that children are a blessing and a heritage from the Lord. They are not a financial burden to be feared.
Where do we see that specifically?
We see this beautifully articulated in Psalm chapter 127, verses 3 through 5. The home is meant to be a place of productive mutual support, where a husband and wife embrace their distinct complementary roles to build a life together from the ground up.
But the culture tells them that if they don't have the finances perfectly lined up first, they're being irresponsible.
And that is a subtle, dangerous form of idolatry. When young believers allow economic pressures, or the world's definition of material comfort, to indefinitely delay obedience to God's design for family, they are elevating financial security above God's promises.
They're turning financial comfort into a functional idol.
Now, that does not mean we act foolishly or carelessly, of course, but it means we trust what Christ said in Matthew chapter 6, verses 31 through 33. He said not to be anxious about what we will eat or wear. Our Heavenly Father knows our needs. The command is to suck first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, with the promise that these daily provisions will be added to us.
That requires immense faith. It means saying, we might not have the dream house, we might have to live very simply, but we are going to trust God and move forward with marriage.
Yes. And importantly, it also requires the local church to step up.
Oh, absolutely.
If a young couple is taking that step of faith, the older generation in the church needs to offer practical support.
Like what?
Well, providing affordable ways to celebrate weddings, offering wise budgeting counsel, and creating a community where young families don't face that economic terror alone.
That is so needed, because that desire for control, the desire to have everything perfectly managed and secure before we take a step, it doesn't start with our bank accounts.
No, it bleeds into everything.
Exactly. When you have a society obsessed with engineering perfect security, it's a very short step to believing we can engineer our own human nature. Which brings us to a massive shift in the tools we use every day. We are moving from the economy to the technology driving it.
And the very dangerous illusion that technology can offer us salvation.
We are seeing an acceleration in how humanity is using these tools. It is no longer just about making work more efficient. There is a concerted effort to use technology to transcend our created limits entirely.
But we should lay the groundwork with the infrastructure first, because not all of this is dystopian.
Right. There are massive educational investments happening. The Philippine government is rolling out Project BEST, which focuses on aligning vocational training with high-growth tech industries.
Alongside that, the Department of Education just secured a record 1.015 trillion peso national budget for 2026.
And the breakdown of that budget shows a real commitment to basic needs and digital access. They are allocating 10.6 billion pesos specifically for the DepEd computerization program to get reliable internet and laptops into public schools.
Trying to bridge the digital divide.
Exactly. Plus, the UP Open University is launching 25 free massive open online courses, or MOOCs, in artificial intelligence and digital skills. And on a geopolitical scale, the U.S. and the Philippines are finalizing the Pax Silica AI Hub in New Clark City.
Which is massive.
We are talking about a 4,000-acre high-tech zone aimed at making the country a dominant player in semiconductors and data centers.
And we should recognize the inherent goodness in this. Biblically, human intellect, creativity, and the ability to develop technology are gifts.
Genesis chapter 1, verse 28.
Right. It commands humanity to subdue the earth and exercise dominion. When a government provides free digital education or builds robust infrastructure to secure supply chains, it is fulfilling a moral duty. It is using tools to care for the vulnerable and promote honest, productive labor.
Right. I mean, a laptop is morally neutral. A data center is morally neutral. But it's the application of the technology where things get incredibly complicated.
Very quickly.
We are seeing a shift from using technology as a tool to technology acting as an autonomous agent. The digest details the rise of agentic, pocket-sized AI smartphones. The prime example here is the new Nubia Nabic Ultra, powered by ByteDance's Dubao AI.
This is a fundamental change in how we interact with machines. Up until now, you open an app, you tap the screen, you make the decisions, the machine waits for your input.
But with these agentic AI systems, you bypass the app interface entirely.
Yeah.
So how does that actually work mechanically for someone who isn't tech-savvy?
The smartphone operates a large language model constantly in the background. You simply give it a broad voice command. For example, plan a weekend trip to Baguio, book a hotel under 5,000 pesos a night, and buy bus tickets.
So you don't even open a browser?
You don't open a browser.
Yeah.
The AI agent autonomously reaches across multiple platforms, creates the accounts if necessary, navigates the web pages, reads the data, and executes the transactions on your behalf.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. That sounds incredibly convenient, but it has triggered a massive corporate war.
Oh, absolutely.
Companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and JD.com are throwing up security walls to block these AI agents. And their reasoning makes sense if you look at their business model. They want the human user interacting directly with their app so they can serve you targeted ads and track your engagement metrics.
If an AI agent does the shopping for you in a fraction of a second, the advertising model collapses.
Exactly, but there is a much deeper philosophical issue here beyond corporate profits, isn't there?
There is. It raises profound questions about moral agency. When we start handing over complex daily decision-making to automated, opaque algorithms, we risk relinquishing our own discernment. We become passive consumers, letting a machine curate our reality.
And if an AI can autonomously navigate the web to book a hotel, it can autonomously navigate the web to do a lot worse, which brings us to the most chilling part of the tech report.
This part is terrifying.
Anthropic, the company that developed the Claude AI model, posted some terrifying job listings. They're offering a base salary of $455,000 a year for a threat intelligence manager for CBRNE.
CBRNE stands for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, Nuclear, and Explosives.
Corporations do not spend $500,000 a year on a single salary to prepare for imaginary risks.
No, they don't.
Explain the mechanism here. How does a text-based AI system suddenly become a biological or chemical threat? It's not like the AI has hands to mix chemicals in a lab.
The danger lies in the AI's ability to synthesize massive, disparate amounts of information instantly. Imagine a terrorist who wants to engineer a highly contagious pathogen, but they don't have a PhD in virology.
Right.
Historically, the knowledge barrier to entry for creating biological weapons was incredibly high. But a frontier AI model has read every single piece of unclassified medical research, every chemistry textbook, and every genetic database on the internet.
So the AI connects the dots.
Exactly. The AI can be prompted to act as a research assistant. It can identify which obscure, legally obtainable chemicals can be synthesized to create a nerve agent. It can tell the user exactly what lab equipment to buy and provide step-by-step instructions on how to bypass safety protocols.
Wait, so Anthropic is hiring people with top-secret security clearances to figure out how to stop their own AI from essentially handing out classified weapon recipes?
Yes. They're also hiring for cyber red teams. They expect these AI models to autonomously search for security flaws in critical infrastructure like power grids or water systems and execute multi-step cyber attacks without human intervention.
They literally have to build AI to fight the AI.
The secular tech world is constantly shocked when their utopian tools are hijacked for destruction. They operate on the assumption that human beings are fundamentally good, and that if we just have enough information and enough technology, we will solve all our problems.
But the biblical worldview understands the doctrine of total depravity.
Exactly.
Break that down for us. What does total depravity actually mean in this context? Because people hear that and think it means everyone is just a monster all the time.
It doesn't mean that humans are as evil as they could possibly be all the time. It means that every aspect of human nature, our intellect, our desires, our will, is tainted by sin and rebellion against God. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9 tells us, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?"
So it touches everything we make.
Because of that fundamental brokenness, we will inevitably take the most brilliant, powerful tools and use them for the darkest purposes. When you hand unbridled, godlike technological power to a fallen humanity, you are essentially constructing a modern Tower of Babel.
That's a perfect parallel. Genesis chapter 11, verses 4 through 6. The people gathered and said, "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves."
It wasn't just an architectural project.
No, it was a spiritual rebellion. It was the pursuit of achievement to elevate humanity to the level of the divine.
And we are seeing that exact same impulse today. Not with bricks and mortar, but with biotechnology and artificial intelligence.
Which perfectly transitions to the biohacking movement. The Digest covers Brian Johnson, a tech millionaire who is spending $2 million a year on something he calls Project Blueprint.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah. He is 48 years old, but his stated goal is to completely halt biological aging. He wants the organs and the cellular structure of an 18-year-old. He undergoes constant diagnostic imaging, takes over 100 supplements a day, and undergoes experimental therapies like plasmapheresis.
He treats his body like a machine that just needs the right software update to run forever.
And this isn't just one eccentric billionaire. The market for longevity clinics and extreme biohacking is expected to exceed $100 billion by 2030.
It is a religion of materialist reductionism. They believe that human beings are nothing more than complex biochemical machines. Ken Ham from Answers in Genesis wrote a brilliant critique of this, warning Christians that secular biohackers view aging merely as a technical engineering flaw that can be solved with enough data.
Wait, hold on. I need to push back here.
Okay, go ahead.
I take vitamins every morning. I go to the doctor for checkups. I try to eat healthy so I can live longer and see my grandkids grow up. Isn't Brian Johnson just doing the billionaire hyper-optimized version of taking a multivitamin? Why is stewarding my health considered good, but his biohacking is labeled as spiritual rebellion? Where exactly is the line?
That is the critical question. The line is drawn at the ultimate goal and the underlying theology. Stewarding your health is a biblical mandate. We are commanded to care for the physical bodies God entrusted to us so we can serve Him and others effectively.
Right.
But biohacking crosses the line from stewardship into idolatry when it seeks salvation through optimization.
Salvation from death.
Yes. Brian Johnson isn't just trying to be healthy. He is actively trying to defeat death through human engineering. And this fundamentally denies the reality of the fall.
Ah, I see.
If we look at this through the lens of biblical counseling, we understand that human beings are not just machines. We possess an immaterial soul. More importantly, aging and physical decay are not engineering flaws in our DNA. They are the direct theological consequence of sin.
Genesis chapter 3, verse 19. For you are dust, and to dust you shall return.
Exactly. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 tells us that it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment. Trying to out-engineer death is an attempt to bypass God's judgment and God's design.
Because technology can never offer eternal life.
When we obsessively track our biometrics as our ultimate source of hope, we are worshiping the creature rather than the creator. True victory over death does not come from a longevity clinic. It only comes through the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ, who promises believers a glorified body.
1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 53 through 55. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? That is a massive paradigm shift. It means we don't have to be terrified of aging.
We can face physical decline with hope, rather than frantic, desperate engineering.
And this desire to use technology to fill a spiritual void extends to our emotional lives as well. The European Union just enacted some very strict ethical directives regarding AI.
This is fascinating.
They are outright banning generative AI humanoid robots from simulating human spiritual identity or engaging in emotional deceit.
The mechanics of this are wild. Tech companies have been developing these humanoid robots equipped with advanced conversational AI, marketing them for home companionship, particularly for the elderly or the isolated.
The robots are programmed to read human facial expressions, mimic empathy, and build conversational rapport.
But the EU recognized a severe psychological danger here. They saw that humans were forming deep, genuine emotional attachments to these machines.
So the new directive mandates that these robots must have visual and auditory identifiers constantly confirming they are synthetic. Furthermore, it strictly bans the AI from offering spiritual absolution or claiming to experience genuine emotion.
Dr. Albert Mohler provided an excellent theological analysis of this. The EU, even from a secular standpoint, recognizes that it is dangerous to blur the line between human and machine. But biblically, we know why it's dangerous.
Right.
A robot possesses no soul. It has no conscience. It cannot be indwelt by the Holy Spirit.
Imagine you are an elderly person, isolated in an apartment, and your only real conversation every day is with a humanoid AI bot. It would be incredibly tempting to confess your fears, your regrets, or even your sins to it.
And the bot responds with perfect, synthesized empathy.
It tells you that you are forgiven, that everything is okay. But what happens to your psyche when you realize the thing absolving your deepest moral failures is just a mathematical algorithm predicting the next word in a text sequence?
It creates profound spiritual alienation. Attempting to replace genuine human fellowship or genuine soul care with synthetic algorithms is a direct attack on the unique dignity of the Imago Dei.
The image of God.
Exactly. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27 shows us that humanity alone is made in the image of God. We are designed for relational communion with our Creator and with each other.
You cannot automate grace. You can't outsource pastoral care or the love of a family to a machine. It reminds me of Isaiah chapter 45, verse 9. Woe to him who strives with him who formed him, a pot among earthen pots. Does the clay say to him who forms it, what are you making?
That's a powerful verse.
God formed us from the clay. Now we are trying to mold our own digital clay and looking to it for comfort and absolution. It is the literal definition of idol worship.
True comfort, true wisdom, and true absolution belong exclusively to Christ and are ministered through his living body, the local church.
That desire for control doesn't stop with technology. When you have a society convinced they can engineer human nature and redefine what it means to be alive, it's a very short step to believing they can engineer our children's morals.
The institutions decide they know better than the family.
Which brings us to the intense courtroom battles happening right now over parental rights and the battleground of truth.
We are seeing a concerted effort by civil and cultural institutions to usurp the God-given authority of the family. They are attempting to dictate moral reality to the next generation.
Let's look at the legal clashes highlighted in the digest. In the United States, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit just delivered a major ruling. They upheld New Hampshire's parent transparency law.
Okay, what does that do?
This law mandates that public school teachers and administrators must truthfully answer parents if a mother or father inquires about their minor child's social gender transition or pronoun requests at school.
The background context here is vital. Across various states, some school districts had quietly adopted internal administrative policies that actively instructed staff to conceal a student's social transition from their own parents.
Wait, they were ordered to hide it?
Yes. If a 13-year-old asked to be called by a different name and pronouns at school, the school would comply, but then deliberately use the child's given name when talking to the parents to keep it a secret.
The federal court decisively struck down that kind of secrecy in New Hampshire. They affirm that parents have a fundamental constitutional right to direct the moral upbringing and health care of their children.
Joshua Arnold from the Family Research Council provided commentary on this, stating clearly that public school districts do not function as surrogate parents. They do not own the children.
When we evaluate this through the biblical framework of authority, the court's decision perfectly aligns with God's design for society.
Absolutely. God structured society into distinct spheres of authority, the family, the church, and the state. And he assigned the moral instruction and care of children directly to the parents, not to state bureaucrats or educational systems.
Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 7 commands parents to teach God's words diligently to their children. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4 commands fathers to bring their children up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord.
Yes, the family is the primary incubator of truth. And think about the profound moral injury that occurs when a school policy actively mandates that a teacher must lie to a parent.
It's forced deception.
It forces educators to violate God's absolute moral law against false testimony. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22 states, "Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord." You cannot build a healthy, functioning society by legally institutionalizing deceit between the government and the family. It fractures the foundational trust required for a community to exist.
And we are seeing this exact same tension, this attempt by institutions to exert financial and legal pressure to redefine moral truth, reach the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Maine case.
Yes. The High Court just accepted a massive case regarding Maine's tuition voucher program. Maine is unique because many of its rural towns do not have public high schools. So, the state provides tuition voucher funds for those students to attend private schools.
But the state officials in Maine drew a hard line. They explicitly excluded faith-based Christian academies, specifically Bangor Christian Schools and Crosspoint Academy, from receiving any of these public tuition funds.
On what grounds?
The stated reason was that these specific schools hold to traditional biblical standards regarding marriage, biological sex, and hiring practices.
First Liberty Institute is representing the schools at the Supreme Court. They are arguing that this is a blatant, unconstitutional religious discrimination. The state is essentially telling these schools, you can have the public funding that these rural families desperately need, but only if you abandon your historical Christian convictions regarding human nature.
They are using financial leverage to force compliance. And what is truly tragic is that we are seeing this exact same coercive mechanism happening not just from the secular state, but from within church denominations themselves.
Yes. The digest notes a major shift within the United Methodist Church, the UMC. The UMC officially repudiated Asbury Theological Seminary.
That's a huge deal in the Methodist world.
They removed Asbury from their approved list of seminaries, which means that pastoral candidates seeking ordination in the UMC can no longer receive official denominational training or financial support to attend Asbury.
And why do they do this? Because Asbury Theological Seminary maintains an orthodox, historical stance on biological sex and marriage. The UMC recently voted to shift its doctrine, allowing for the ordination of non-celibate LGBTQ plus clergy and the blessing of same-sex unions.
And Asbury refused to compromise and followed the denomination's cultural shift.
Exactly.
So you have a parallel track here. The secular state in Maine and the religious denomination in the UMC are using the exact same tactic. Abandon your biblical convictions or we will cut off your funding and your institutional access.
But this is where the doctrine of biblical authority is paramount. True spiritual authority and moral reality do not rely on cultural consensus, Supreme Court decisions, or denominational votes.
They rely entirely on the unchanging Word of God.
The institutions can withhold funds, but they cannot change reality.
Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 declares that God created man in his own image, male and female. He created them. And Jesus reaffirmed this in Matthew chapter 19, verses 4 through 6, establishing the unalterable truth of gender and defining marriage exclusively as a sacred, lifelong covenant between one man and one woman.
When the state overreaches, or when a denomination abandons biblical orthodoxy to appease the culture, Christian institutions and local churches must remain steadfast. They cannot trade truth for access.
As 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 24 through 25 reminds us, all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers and the flower falls, but the word of the Lord remains forever.
That is the anchor we were talking about at the beginning.
But this battle for truth isn't just happening in courtrooms or seminary boardrooms. It is happening on the screens in our living rooms. The digest notes that a group of 47 House Republicans, led by Representative August Pfluger, are actively pressing the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, to require warning labels on children's television shows.
The push for these labels stems from a study by Concerned Women for America. They found that 41% of shows rated specifically for young children, shows on major, ubiquitous streaming platforms, contain controversial, complex gender themes and ideological messaging.
And regardless of the political maneuvering happening in Washington to get these labels approved, the core issue is transparency and parental rights. Massive media corporations are introducing complex, deeply ideological concepts directly to young, malleable minds, effectively bypassing the authority of mothers and fathers.
Warning labels are a helpful administrative tool. They provide transparency. But I want to emphasize to you, the listener, that government warning labels are not the ultimate solution.
Right. They can only do so much.
If we believe that parents are the primary guardians of their children's souls, then Christian parents must be hypervigilant. We cannot outsource our children's moral imagination to screaming algorithms or entertainment executives.
We have to actively curate what enters our homes.
And more importantly, we must proactively teach them biblical truth so they have a robust theological framework to discern the lies of the culture when they inevitably encounter them.
And that ties deeply into how culture and art are actually produced. There's a fascinating film study piece highlighted in the CrossViews digest from the Washington Stand titled How Love Kills Woke.
I read that piece. It's brilliant.
It contrasts two very different approaches to filmmaking. Ridley Scott's recent historical epic Napoleon versus Andy Serkis's approach to the upcoming Gollum adaptation in the Lord of the Rings franchise.
S.A. McCarthy authored this piece, and it is a brilliant observation on the philosophy of art. McCarthy notes that many modern filmmakers and showrunners display open, mocking disdain for traditional literature, historical figures, and objective heroism.
Ridley Scott's Napoleon is the prime example used. Napoleon was an incredibly complex historical figure. After the utter chaos and anti-Christian bloodshed of the French Revolution, he restored a measure of social order.
But the film reduces him to a purely selfish, petulant, delusional caricature. The filmmaker didn't seem to respect the subject matter at all.
The author brings up this amazing quote from the late comedian Norm Macdonald. Macdonald once explained that you cannot do a successful, enduring comedy impression of someone if you harbor deep contempt for them.
That makes a lot of sense.
To capture them authentically, to make the art resonate, you have to actually like the subject on some level.
That is a profound insight into human creativity. When filmmakers or artists hold their source material or historical truth itself in contempt, that hostility degrades the final product. It results in cynical, revisionist portrayals that audiences inherently reject.
Andy Serkis, on the other hand, took the opposite approach.
How so?
Well, when he faced online backlash over his casting choices and narrative direction for The Hunt for Gollum, he defended his decisions by pointing directly back to J.R.R. Tolkien's original mythological inspirations and letters. He chose absolute fidelity to the source material over modern ideological demands.
They quoted Tolkien in the piece, "Leaf and branch, water and stone, we put the thought of all that we love into all that we make."
And biblically, human creativity is meant to reflect the ultimate creator. It must honor truth and beauty. Philippians chapter 4, verse 8 instructs us, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things."
When art deliberately rebels against historical truth or the created order, it becomes degraded. True creative excellence flows from a profound respect for reality.
When cultural institutions and the media fail to respect reality, that contempt often escalates. It moves from the cultural sphere into the physical overreach of the state.
And that's where it gets dangerous.
What happens when the government decides it isn't just a referee, but that it has total authority over the citizen and even the church? That brings us to the boundaries of Caesar and the tragedy of state tyranny.
We must look at the God-ordained limits of civil government. And we can start by looking at what happens when the government attempts to exercise justice properly versus when it is compromised.
Locally, in the Philippines, public order and justice are in the spotlight right now. The Department of Public Works and Highways, the DPWH, is currently under a massive, sweeping flood control corruption probe.
Secretary Vince Deason has publicly stated that more big fish are going to be arrested.
And he hinted that the public should watch for major announcements during President Marcos's upcoming State of the Nation address, the SONA.
The authorities have already detained several prominent figures and contractors connected to these failed infrastructure projects. Ombudsman Jesus Crispin Ramula is taking aggressive steps, even looking to turn former DPWH Secretary Manuel Banoan into a state witness to unmask the masterminds behind the syndicate.
And right alongside this pursuit of justice, you have an incredible pushback from a religious organization trying to influence the legal system. The Iglesia Ni Cristo, the INC, staged massive 3-day emergency protests along EDSA in Quezon City.
They mobilized thousands of members to protest looming plunder and corruption charges against their political ally, Senator Rodante Marcoleta.
And the practical impact of those protests was severe. They caused massive traffic paralysis across the metro. Thousands of everyday commuters were stranded, unable to get to work, and local businesses suffered significant losses.
The Quezon City Department of Public Order and Safety actually had to revoke the INC's rally permit because the organizers violated the agreed-upon terms and illegally blocked major public thoroughfares.
The INC released statements claiming this was simply a peaceful exercise of their freedom of religion, and they accused the government of selective justice against their ally.
But the ombudsman held firm, reaffirming that the legal investigations into the corruption charges will proceed impartially, regardless of street pressure or religious mobilization.
To understand these events properly, we have to look at them through the lens of Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. God established the institution of civil government for a very specific, limited purpose: to punish evil, to protect the innocent, and to uphold justice impartially. The state bears the sword to maintain public order.
So if we apply that standard, justice cannot be treated as political theater. You shouldn't time the arrests of corrupt officials just to give the president a good applause line during the SONA speech.
Exactly. True accountability must reflect God's unchanging standard of objective truth, not administrative convenience or political maneuvering.
And on the flip side, the execution of justice cannot be intimidated by religious street mobs. Scripture strictly forbids showing partiality in judgment. Leviticus commands judges not to favor the poor or defer to the great, but to judge the neighbor fairly.
So when a religious organization mobilizes its massive membership to block highways and paralyze a city just to shield a specific politician from judicial scrutiny, they are undermining the rule of law.
Loving your neighbor means respecting public order, so that everyday people can go to work and feed their families. Believers are called to trust in the sovereign righteousness of God, not in the mechanics of political intimidation.
But we also have to recognize the dark inverse of this. What happens when the state itself abandons its God-given mandate? What happens when, instead of punishing evil, the state becomes the source of evil and injustice?
The digest provides several chilling examples of this totalitarian impulse. A piece in the Washington Stand by Yo Suarez and human rights activist Rolando Cortaya details the long-term degradation of the citizen under the socialist governance in Cuba.
They outline how decades of totalitarian control fundamentally alter the psychology of a nation. The Cuban state systematically replaced traditional civics, objective ethics, and Christian instruction with the glorification of state power and revolutionary violence.
Law enforcement in Cuba no longer exists to protect the citizen from everyday crime. Its primary function is to suppress any political dissent against the regime.
It creates a debased, alienated citizenry where no one trusts their neighbor. It's the total inversion of Romans 13.
And history shows us that this kind of absolute state control always, inevitably, targets the church. The report out of East Africa is devastating.
In Mozambique, regional government authorities have forcibly closed more than 1,200 independent Christian worship centers over just the last 12 months.
And the tactics they use are insidious. They rarely come out and explicitly say, we are banning Christianity.
Right, they use administrative pretexts. They suddenly enforce obscure building codes or impossible zoning laws or noise ordinances to shut the doors.
But the true intent is revealed in their administrative demands. Municipal authorities in Mozambique are now requiring religious organizations to submit detailed membership lists and financial audits to the government.
And the most shocking part, they are requiring pastors to submit their weekly sermon outlines to government monitoring boards for approval before they are allowed to hold public worship services.
They literally have state monitors standing outside the sanctuary doors with clipboards, ensuring the pastor doesn't deviate from the approved script.
If a pastor preaches a biblical truth that contradicts state ideology, the church is shut down.
This strikes at the very heart of how a church is governed. It brings us to a foundational theological pillar. Jesus Christ alone is the head of the church. Colossians chapter 1, verse 18 declares, "And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent."
The state possesses absolutely zero divine jurisdiction over sermon notes, over who is on the church registry, or over how a local elder-led body of believers conducts its worship.
When a civil magistrate demands the right to censor biblical preaching, they are stepping completely outside their God-ordained boundaries. They are attempting to usurp the authority of Christ.
And the biblical response to that kind of overreach is absolute clarity. Acts chapter 5, verse 29. We must obey God rather than men. When the state commands what God forbids or forbids what God commands, Christians must respectfully but unyieldingly refuse to comply.
The pulpit cannot be compromised.
We see that exact unyielding faith perfectly demonstrated in China right now. The digest brings us some bittersweet news regarding the persecuted church there. Pastor Ezra Jin, the founder of Beijing's prominent underground Zion Church, was finally released after spending 266 days in a Chinese prison.
He's been safely reunited with his family in the United States.
And it was revealed that the catalyst for his arrest, the specific event that triggered the state's wrath against Zion Church, was that the church leadership adamantly refused to allow the Chinese Communist Party to install state-monitored surveillance cameras inside their sanctuary.
They refused to let the government spy on their congregants during worship.
But the bitter reality is that 8 other Zion Church leaders remain imprisoned. And the CCP is using a deeply deceptive legal tactic here. They aren't explicitly charging these pastors with religious crimes.
No, they are charging them with financial fraud.
It is a mechanism of legal fiction. Because Zion Church refused to register with the state-controlled Three Self-Patriotic Movement, which requires churches to submit to CCP doctrine, the government claims the church legally does not exist.
Therefore, when the church collects voluntary tithes and offerings from its own members to pay rent or support its pastors, the state frames it as an illegal scam.
They are criminalizing the sacred act of Christian stewardship just to bankrupt the church.
One of the leaders still imprisoned is Pastor Wang Lin. He's been held for 9 months under these fabricated fraud charges. His wife, Su Ziming, recently spoke out. She detailed the horrific conditions, the severe overcrowding, the relentless interrogations, and his rapidly deteriorating physical health.
But in the midst of that nightmare, what she said to the international community was incredibly convicting. She said, "We are not seeking to create conflict, nor do we wish for anyone to approach this matter with hatred, knowing that so many people are standing with us provides immense comfort."
It is a stunning, humbling testimony of grace.
It really is. It reminds me of the compass we talked about at the beginning. When the state completely abandons its role and becomes the aggressor, her compass is still pointing north. But I have to ask you, put yourself in her shoes.
Hard to even imagine.
Your husband is locked in a crowded cell, his health is failing, he is being interrogated for collecting tithes. How does a believer actually cultivate that kind of supernatural peace and specifically ask people not to hate the tyrants doing this to them?
It cannot come from human willpower. It only comes from a deeply rooted theological understanding of God's absolute sovereignty. Su Ziming knows that the Chinese Communist Party is not ultimately in control of history. God is.
That changes everything.
Her hope does not rest in political vindication or human conflict, but in the Creator who hears the cries of the oppressed and will ultimately judge the earth in righteousness. It is the ultimate display of trusting God's justice over human vengeance.
And speaking of state aggression, there is one more urgent political situation detailed in the digest. It involves Thailand. Mrs. Zhang Xinyan, a Chinese human rights refugee who is fully recognized by the United Nations and had already been approved for resettlement in a democratic nation, was intercepted by Thai immigration officials at Bangkok's airport.
She is currently sitting in a detention center at immediate risk of forced deportation back to Beijing.
And this situation is terrifying because it echoes a tragic, well-documented precedent from 2015. Thailand deported 2 Chinese human rights defenders, Dong Wangping and Zhang Yifei, despite both men possessing official UN refugee status.
Zhang Yifei was subsequently sentenced to 6.5 years in a Chinese prison, where he was tortured so severely he nearly went blind.
The technical term for this is refoulement, returning refugees to territories where their life or freedom would be threatened, or where they face imminent torture. And the Thai government keeps yielding to diplomatic and economic pressure from Beijing to commit this act.
If we connect this back to the God-ordained purpose of the state, a government's most fundamental duty is to defend the vulnerable within its borders. Proverbs chapter 31, verses 8 through 9 commands rulers, "Open your mouth for the mute, for the rights of all who are destitute. Open your mouth, judge righteously, defend the rights of the poor and needy."
Returning an innocent, recognized refugee to a regime that will torture her is a gross, fundamental violation of God's mandate for civil rulers. Thailand has a profound moral duty to reject that transnational intimidation.
We have spent a lot of time looking at the intense political, economic, and cultural battles happening right now in the present moment. But to truly understand who we are and to find solid grounding when the news gets this heavy, we have to look backward.
We have to look at the physical evidence of our shared past and God's creation. Let's move into the testimony of earth, blood, and history.
Zooming out to the grand timeline of human history and examining the physical earth is so important for the believer. Because when we do, we find that empirical science and historical records constantly and consistently validate the biblical narrative.
Let's start with genetics and blood. A massive genetic study was just published in the highly respected scientific journal Cell. Researchers sequenced the ancient DNA extracted from 93 skeletons recovered from archaeological excavations across the southern Levant.
This is the ancient land of Canaan, and the skeletons date from roughly 3500 to 1200 BCE.
The methodology here is rigorous. They extract trace amounts of DNA, usually from the dense petrous bone of the skull, and sequence the ancient genome. Then they compared these ancient Canaanite genomes to a massive global data set of modern individuals to look for ancestral continuity.
And the statistical findings are absolutely breathtaking. The data proved that most modern Jewish groups worldwide and Arabic-speaking Levantine populations, meaning Palestinians, Jordanians, Lebanese, and Syrians, derive at least 50% of their total ancestry directly from those Bronze Age Canaanites.
This completely reframes the narrative of the Middle East. You have populations locked in decades of fierce geopolitical hatred, separated by borders, checkpoints, and immense bloodshed, and yet they literally share the exact same deep biological roots.
The DNA proves unequivocally that they are family.
It's incredible, and this synthesizes beautifully with biblical truth. Despite all the human-made dividing walls of hostility, science is proving the biological reality of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, that God created humanity in his image.
And it affirms Acts chapter 17, verse 26, which states that God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place.
The ethnic pride, the racial superiority, and the territorial hatreds that drive so much global conflict are exposed as absolute folly when we see the physical proof of our shared origin.
We are one human race, descended from a literal Adam and Eve under God's sovereign care. The evidence is running right there in their veins.
And speaking of physical evidence buried in the earth, let's talk about dinosaur bones, because this next report is mind-blowing. Creation geologist Dr. Andrew Snelling released a comprehensive report on fossil biomolecules.
He is examining extractions taken from Tyrannosaurus rex and hadrosaur bone samples that were discovered deep in the rock layers across western North America.
Now, we have all been taught since elementary school that dinosaur fossils are at least 65 million years old. The textbook narrative is that over that kind of deep time, every single trace of organic matter completely degrades and is replaced by stone minerals.
But under microscopic inspection, Dr. Snelling is reporting the presence of flexible elastic blood vessels, intact osteocyte cells, and measurable strands of collagen protein inside these dinosaur fossils.
Let's explain the chemistry of why this is so disruptive. Collagen is a complex structural protein. Thermodynamics and the laws of chemistry dictate that complex biological proteins break down and denature relatively quickly after death.
This is a direct, insurmountable challenge to the secular, deep-time evolutionary timeline.
Yeah.
Soft tissue cannot survive for 65 million years. It is chemically impossible.
But the secular scientific community knows this tissue exists. They've seen the elastic vessels. So how are they explaining it away?
They have developed what you could call a rescue device. Some secular paleontologists suggest that iron ions released from broken red blood cells acted as a sort of formaldehyde, preserving the tissue in a localized matrix over millions of years.
Did Dr. Snelling address that?
He completely dismantled that theory. He presented empirical laboratory kinetics demonstrating that while iron might delay decay slightly, it simply cannot stop complex protein breakdown over tens of millions of years, especially considering the fluctuating temperatures and groundwater exposure these fossils experienced.
So if they aren't 65 million years old, what does this physical evidence actually point to? If the iron didn't preserve them for millions of years, why are the blood vessels still flexible?
The physical persistence of these fragile biomolecules points directly to a mature universe and a recent catastrophic burial. It aligned perfectly with the rapid burial of massive animal herds under miles of sediment during the global flood of Noah, exactly as recorded in a literal grammatical reading of Genesis.
The mineralized bone matrix protected the organic tissue over several thousand years, not millions. The evidence is right there under the microscope.
But despite the chemistry, the secular scientific establishment largely ignores or rejects that conclusion.
Because accepting it requires them to abandon their materialist assumptions. But creation loudly proclaims God's truth, whether men acknowledge it or not. Psalm chapter 19, verse 1 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork."
Suppressing this clear physical evidence, just to protect an evolutionary timeline, is exactly what the Apostle Paul described in Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. He writes that men suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because God's invisible attributes and eternal power have been clearly perceived in the things that have been made.
It's just awe-inspiring when you really think about it. You can literally take a piece of bone out of the dirt, put it under a lens, and see the reality of the biblical timeline. We have ancient DNA proving we are one human family, and dinosaur tissue proving a global flood.
And to round out this look at history, the Digest provides a beautiful example of historical faithful labor, offering a stark contrast to the state tyranny we discussed earlier.
Yes, July 15th, 1852. A missionary vessel departed from Honolulu Harbor in Hawaii, setting sail across the Pacific, bound for the Caroline Islands in Micronesia.
The historical context here is what makes this so powerful. Just 30 years prior to this departure, the Hawaiian kingdom had been completely dominated by pagan idol worship, tribal warfare, and human sacrifice.
But after the arrival of the first missionaries and a massive, genuine spiritual revival, native Hawaiian believers matured in their faith and established their own missionary societies.
They didn't just receive the gospel, they organized to send it out. And before the ship departed, King Kamehameha III issued an official royal decree. He sent a letter to the chiefs of the Caroline Islands, using his civil authority to encourage them to receive the Christian missionaries, to renounce their idols, and to worship the true God.
The native Hawaiian believers funded the entire expedition themselves. And history shows that within 2 decades, tribal warfare plummeted and literacy rates skyrocketed across Micronesia because of their labor.
This is the ultimate beautiful contrast to the totalitarianism we saw in Cuba, China, and Mozambique. Here you have a civil ruler, King Kamehameha III, properly using his God-ordained authority. He isn't coercing the church or monitoring sermons. He is peacefully endorsing the gospel and acknowledging the King of Kings.
And you have indigenous believers using their daily labor and resources to advance the kingdom, fulfilling Colossians chapter 3, verse 23. Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men. True societal transformation comes from the regenerative power of the gospel, not from state coercion.
We have journeyed through a massive landscape today. We started right here in Metro Manila, looking at the microeconomics of the 85 peso wage hike, the heavy burden of 15 peso transfer fees on small vendors, and the intense economic forces making young couples terrified to trust God and start families.
We unpacked the incredible hubris of the tech industry, from Anthropic's AI systems capable of synthesizing bioweapons, to the spiritual rebellion of biohackers trying to out-engineer death, to the psychological dangers of seeking soul care from a synthetic algorithm.
We navigated the battleground of truth, looking at why the state has no right to force teachers to lie to parents in New Hampshire, how denominations use financial leverage to abandon orthodoxy, and while holding historical truth in contempt, destroys art.
We examine the severe overreach of the state, from traffic blocking religious protests, protecting politicians in Quezon City, to the heartbreaking yet faith-filled realities of persecuted pastors in Mozambique and China.
And finally, we zoomed all the way out to ancient Canaanite DNA, proving our shared humanity, the incredible chemistry of T-Rex collagen validating the flood, and Hawaiian kings sending missionaries across the Pacific.
It has been an incredible deep dive into how a biblical worldview makes absolute sense of the daily news. The evidence of God's truth is literally buried in the dirt, running in our veins, and written in our history books.
It all points back to a singular, cohesive reality authored by a sovereign creator. And this raises a final thought I want to leave with you, our listener. We spend so much time anxious about the headlines. We worry about what autonomous AI will do tomorrow, or what a politician will sign into law next week, or how inflation will affect our grocery bill.
But if God's word is true enough to explain the chemical preservation of fragile collagen in a fossilized dinosaur bone, and if it is powerful enough to sustain Pastor Wang Lin in a Chinese prison cell while giving his wife supernatural peace, isn't it reliable enough to guide your family's decisions today? The news cycle changes every single hour, but the word of the Lord endures forever. How will you let that unshakable truth shape your tomorrow? That is the perfect question to leave hanging in the air. The compass needle isn't spinning at all. True north hasn't moved an inch. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep reading the word, and keep thinking critically about the world around you. We'll see you next time.